All right, fine. All right, you can hear me now. Great, wonderful. So yeah, my name is Yat. I'm chairman and co-founder of a company called Animoca Brands. I'm going to talk about sort of our mission in terms of what we think is important in the space. All of you are here already. Some OGs here in the room that know about NFTs, so I don't have to go to the details. But I want to first start off with one note that wasn't part of the presentation, but I think it's important, especially in light of some of the news that happened in the last 24 hours or the last 3 weeks. And that there is really a tale of two stories or when it comes to the narrative of crypto. Because as all of you know, there's been this sort of story around FTX and SAM, and particularly when you take a look at what's happening in the US, a lot of people are worried about the state of the industry. They're worried about, is this actually real? Or is what we're building serious? Isn't it all just a scam, right? That's something that people have started saying, for instance. So that's happening in the US. But similarly to what I'm seeing here, I'm seeing a room full of people excited about building the future. It's what I saw in Korea. It's what I saw in Japan. In Asia, we're seeing a very different narrative. Oops. Let me just go to the next slide here. Oh, different slide. Never mind. I'll just talk over it. Okay. So in Hong Kong, for instance, the first Bitcoin and Ethereum ETF is going to launch tomorrow in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, approved by the SEC. Now, in Japan, in Japan, the Prime Minister has made NFTs and Metaverse a national agenda, for instance, right? So I think what you're seeing is that in Asia, people are building basically towards the future of Web3. They see an opportunity. In America, they're retreating a little bit because they're a little worried about it. And my point is that this is an opportunity for the region. It's an opportunity, of course, also for Taiwan. So let me go straight into the talk. Animoca Brands, what we're about is we're investing. We're one of the, I guess, largest investors in the area of Web3, but we're also builders. We own companies like The Sandbox, Phantom Galaxies, Rev, and a whole host of other projects, which I don't need to go in detail. Over 380 companies in our portfolio today. And we believe in what is known as a shared network effect. So we were early in companies like Axie Infinity, OpenSea, Dapper Labs, Wax, Decentraland, like 4 or 5 years ago. And we believe in this vision, which I'll explain to you why we think of our vision on NFTs, which I hope that all of you might consider as well as you're building a business, that these network effects can be shared in Web3, which is what we believe so much in digital property rights. So the fight is around this. I've said this before, so I think it's worth reiterating. It's about data, the most valuable resource on Earth. It's more valuable than oil. It's more valuable than really any kind of natural resource because it comes from us. When you take a look at, for instance, the daily time that we spend online, it actually is almost 10 hours a day, depending on which country you are, which is more than you work. And every time you work, so to spend on time online, you're actually dropping bits of data. Now, this bits of data isn't very valuable. It's just your digital time. It's your digital attention in and of itself. The photos that you share may not be valuable. The car that you're driving in your Tesla, may not appear valuable. However, the collective, the knowledge that is generated at the billions of users, that is what's valuable. So it's a little bit like finding oil 100 years ago or 200 years ago, and you don't know what to do with it. But now with AI, now with the power of machines, you can extract awesome value, awesome power from our data. But as we spend 10 hours a day or more on these platforms, actually we surrender all of that value to the platform, our digital data, and they become rich and powerful from this data. So actually I think of us as when we use Instagram or Facebook or when we play our favorite games, we are actually working for the platform. We just do it for free. So it's a kind of digital colonialism. And we see the world a little bit like this, where it's basically a place where we have absolutely no freedom whatsoever. Every one of you who's an app developer, it's dependent on Apple to decide whether you can be on the platform. If you are removed from Twitter or removed from Google or from Facebook or from Instagram, you have no digital existence. Your social existence, your value as a human actually is lower because these platforms can decide that. That's not actually what we signed up for, but that's actually what's happening. So we've become digital dependents because of the fact that we do not own our data. And that is why we're so excited about non-fungible tokens as our digital assets, as our digital property rights. I'll explain that shortly. But what it means is very similar to open source. Now data is an open construct. It started off with things like Bitcoin as a kind of, call it store of value. But with non-fungible tokens, which basically store our culture, you have a way in which you can extend the same experiences you have in the physical world as you can basically have in the digital world as you have in the physical world. Let me just give you that sort of example now that data is on a public chain. So the car is an example of decentralized ownership. 130 years ago, when the car was first created as a mass device, it was, one price. It was black, the Ford Model T, and it was basically had only one utility, which is to take you from point A to point B to be a better, more efficient service than, riding a horse. Today, when you buy a car, you have 1,000 reasons why you buy that car. And the value of that car is much more than taking you from point A to point B. Because we have decentralized ownership of cars, that's why we can have Uber. That's why we can have Lyft. It's why you can have custom leather seats. It's why you can have baby seats. It's why you can have special electronics. You can hire a driver. All of these are possible because you do not have to seek permission from the creator of the car. You don't have to go to Volkswagen or to Tesla and say, am I allowed to hire a driver? Can I change the leather seats? You just have to build a business and go to the owners of these cars and say, I have a service for you that's interesting. And this is the reason why, when you have a house, you can get a mortgage. When you have an iPhone or a smartphone, someone can make a case, make headphones. These businesses are all ways in which network effects construe on the ownership of others. This is something we exist and live on today. However, in the digital world, it wasn't possible until non-fungible tokens, in which network effects can accrue on top of all digital experiences. So when people talk about making NFTs inside a game, for instance, it means that you own the items. Even if the game itself is something that you can, the utility might initially be for the game, you have the freedom to take these assets and import them into another game. So an example, Fortnite is obviously a very popular game, maybe 70 million users. If you as a game developer could actually use all the skins, the ownership of these skins, and make another game out of it, you just attract the Fortnite customers. You can open up something like Fortnite Fashion Week, for instance, and you'd have the freedom to do so. For the user, it's more value because his assets can be utilized in more ways. For the original game content creator, it means that there's more value and more network effects that could construe. So the way that we can think of value and sort of utility that's added to the NFTs, these sort of items, is because they have more accrued network effects. The car example I gave has 1,000 network effects. When you buy a car, or when you buy any physical item in the world, how much of it is because of its actual bare utility? I'm pretty sure you don't buy a Birkin bag because you can store stuff in it. Nor do you necessarily buy your favorite Nike shoes or your Adidas or ASICS shoe because it makes you walk faster. Or maybe because it's maybe more efficient. It's because of a network effect that in some cases is invisible. It's powerful because of the branding, because of your friends, because of its value, right? 99% of why you purchase anything in life today is because of these network effects. But what's possible with blockchain is that you can now enumerate and value some of these network effects because it's on-chain. For instance, when you're looking at a Bored Ape, you can see how many people own it. You can see what they're paying for it. You can see how it's used in 10 different ways, for instance. That is one way in which you can then measure the value of the NFT, right? And therefore, the life of the NFT can expand beyond its initial utility. That's what makes it so interesting. And we see this happening all the time in the physical world, and now it's possible because in a decentralized world, you can do that with digital assets. So I want to, this topic was a little bit about gaming. We're one of the largest, I think, Web3 gaming investors. We have over 130 companies in the portfolio are gaming related. And I want to cover a little bit this area of play to earn because it's gone through a little bit of discussion. And it's not so much that a game is about play to earn, but the history of play to earn came not because Axie Infinity, which was, we were the lead investor back in 2019, was because of ownership. The decentralized ownership of Axies allowed for another company to create, which is now called YGG, YieldGit Games, to create a new business around the renting effectively of these Axies and then basically have people in the Philippines play it. That's kind of how it started. It wasn't because Axie Infinity or Sky Mavis did a business plan to launch in the Philippines and do marketing as you would do in Web 2. It's because another group of people were able to own these assets and then they created their own network effects on top of it. And that is a demonstration of the power of non-fungible tokens because other third parties can now create value for them not just you yourself. But where does this value come from in gaming? I think this is something that many game companies struggle as well. So the gaming industry quickly is a $200 billion industry and will grow, as you know. And the first point of value, I want to give you two examples, there's many more, but what Web3 and blockchain does, as it does with all systems, it transparently lays out the value of its data. We do this today in imperfect ways. For instance, when I look at an Instagram influencer, I see how many followers he has, and I make an approximation and say, this influencer has 1 million followers, so I might pay him $10,000 to promote the service, but I actually don't really know if it's real followers, but I make that assumption. But on blockchain, I can verify actually the value of those transactions because everything is on-chain. The ability to audit this online is that value. So where's the first point of value? One of the first points of value is the fact that in the gaming industry, over $100 billion basically is spent in what's known as freemium, free-to-play, but only 1% to 3% actually convert, which is that 97% of everyone who plays a free-to-play game never pays any money. We know this probably in this room. If you ask yourself who basically paid for their mobile game, most of you probably will say, I've never paid for anything. But actually, you're working for it. Because if you don't play the game for free, the person who will pay won't pay. So you're effectively working for the game. What Web3 does is it just finds a way through tokenization to enumerate the value of your contribution to get someone to pay and then share it with you. It could be 1 cent, it could be $5. It doesn't matter what the value is. Maybe you don't want that value, but at least you can measure it. The second area is in the area of advertising and platform fees. So I shared before $200 billion in the gaming industry. Over $100 billion this year will be spent in app installs. Apple, Google, Facebook, advertising basically. And anyone in the gaming industry will know that most of the money you make goes into advertising your game, into a platform where you don't own the customer. And how much of that money, of that $100 billion plus that Apple and Google and Facebook make, goes back into the game industry? Close to zero. So the point is that outside of the 30% platform fee, actually the platforms, to my point about digital colonialism, take the most heaviest of tax. So the gaming industry already makes a lot of value, but the majority of that value goes to a system that doesn't give it back. So when people talk, and this is just an example, all of you will come up with new ideas and models in which you can create more value. But one of the movements that started late last year with Phantom Galaxies and now with others is this idea of play to own or free to own. What is free to own, for instance? Actually, the idea of free to own isn't that I'm just giving something away for free. It might seem like I'm just giving it away for free. Really what you're doing is you're giving assets of your game that are valuable in place of advertising it to the platform itself. So instead of paying what is an average $86 per converted user to Facebook, Google, or Apple, you're basically giving some of that value to the player by giving him a free NFT. It's still marketing, it's still advertising, but how much of that money that you're now potentially offering as value to the player actually goes back into the gaming ecosystem? Definitely more than the platform. So it's a healthier way to attract customers in because you're actually sharing the advertising benefit to the player itself by giving away free NFTs. So it's still a financial construct. There's still value. It's not out of thin air. It's just understanding it will help you design basically the way that you attract customers. And I absolutely believe, because of the way that we can have digital ownership, that some of these ideas of network effects and business models will continue to evolve. These are just some of the examples that the industry is seeing and some of the ways in which you can perhaps grow your business. So just in closing, for some thoughts, blockchains are to be viewed from our perspective as new national economies. So you can't view a Web3 game or metaverse like a classic profit and loss statement. You have to take a look at it from the perspective of a GDP because it's economic activity that drives its value. If you were thinking it purely from profit and loss, then you actually would just want to extract as much value as you can, which is unhealthy for the ecosystem. We've seen this most recently in Korea with a game with WeMix, basically, which is a Korean public game company that basically did a blockchain game and did exactly that. They treated their token economy as an extractive kind of ecosystem. And now they got delisted and have all sorts of other problems because the community revolted. You have to treat them like an economy. How would you grow a country? How would you respect your citizens is a way to think of it. We think of blockchain effectively as political systems. We don't think of them as purely a technology because what they offer is a kind of political system because of the fact that they have basically freedom of access. Gaming is a $100 billion plus virtual item business, but purely rental. And so what we've seen when we move from an area of property rights in the physical world as well, you see value accrue because you can have capital formation. By that I mean that if we already have a gaming industry that generates hundreds of billions of dollars in virtual rental items, which is what we have in all of the games today, in most of them, then what does it mean when you actually have ownership, when you go from rental to ownership? And I think, okay, this different slide order, but anyway. And I think what it also means is that when we go from digital property rights, you go from what is known as company-owned platforms, where you have a form of shareholder capitalism, into community-owned platforms, where basically it turns into stakeholder capitalism. And what I mean by stakeholder capitalism, it means that the relationship with your customer turns from one where it's a consumer actually into an owner. And that's actually a very powerful and differentiating factor. When you buy land in Sandbox or in Life Beyond or Phantom Galaxies or any one of your favorite Web3 games, you become an owner. Your relationship should not be one where you're just a consumer. You're actually a part owner of it, which means that if Sandbox as a game or as an ecosystem becomes more valuable or more precious or more powerful, you actually get to benefit as that owner as well. That's a relationship we don't have with games. You can spend all your life in your favorite game right now. You can play Fortnite every day. But if Fortnite becomes very successful, you do not have a way as a player to participate in its success, even though you as a player have made it successful. Or you've promoted it to your friends, you've added to it. And that's the difference when we move to shareholder capitalism, which is where we are today, to stakeholder capitalism. I want to close with this, a little bit in terms of where we are right now. This is actually an interesting analysis. You see it around if you search it up. It basically measures the total number of people that have DeFi wallets versus the total number of internet users. And it actually tracks very similar to the development of the internet back 25 years ago. So you can see that we're roughly matching it. Now, I believe the acceleration will be faster because unlike 25 years ago, we didn't have to install copper. Some of you, actually most of you are probably too young to remember. But you know, we actually literally, I used to work at AT&T for 1 year, and we literally had to, you know, we had a captain at AT&T because he was running a submarine that would literally lay the cable across the Pacific Ocean. And that's why it was hard to get fast internet, because you had to wait for that guy to basically put the cable across the ocean, plus other people. So we don't have that problem anymore. So things like that are going to allow for faster acceleration. But at this moment in time, the adoption rate is eerily similar, which means we can kind of chart the projection of where Web3 is going to go. Now, what happens when we finally get to the billions of users, we will have this effect, which is, as we've seen in the physical world, physical countries, nations that have no property rights or low property rights have very low GDP. They have very low incomes, because after all, if I don't own the property, I can't invest. I must have certainty to own something in order for me to invest in something, in order to have a long-term plan. How can I plan something for 10 years when I might lose its ownership next month? So these places have very low property rights. Many places in South America, in Africa. Well, North Korea is not even on the chat because it doesn't even count. It's like 0. But then when you go to places where you have strong property rights, including places like Taiwan, or the US, or Hong Kong, or Singapore, you can see that the GDP per capita is significantly higher. And it's not higher by 10 or 20%, but it's higher by 20, 30x. And that's what we think will happen with digital property rights. We believe that we live in a world of basically no property rights in Web3, as I just illustrated. What will happen when we all have digital property rights? When property rights and capital formation can take place in this future of Web3? More economic value will be generated. People like in the Sandbox, for instance, today demonstrate that they can make money on that platform as an employment. And so we're talking about taking just the gaming industry from a several $100 billion industry to a multi-trillion dollar industry. And I'll close with this. I think this is the most important point. So George Washington famously said this: freedom and property rights are inseparable. You can't have one without the other. And this is exactly true for digital property rights. You can't have digital freedom, the freedom to transact, without digital property rights. Thank you.